Good morning. Good morning, you crafty people. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world. Or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Welcome to one and all. Thanks so much for being here today. Thank you for bringing all that you bring with you to this place, all of your uniqueness, your unique beliefs and background and lifestyle and experiences and even your differences, all that helps make you who you are. Thanks for being here. And this welcome, of course, includes those who hear me say this each Sunday as well as those who might be here for the first time. Thank you for all that you bring, and thanks to those of you who are streaming with us this morning, too. It's great to have all of you. Before we greet one another, I'm almost afraid to do that. You're such a lively crowd today. I might not be able to get you back in your seats, but we'll give it a try. But obviously, we're having our holiday art and craft show, so I hope you'll take advantage of that after the service. And enjoy that. And then I also just want to make a couple of special welcomes and announcements. As many of you know, we will have a Healthy Congregations assessment report probably around 12:30. That's what we're shooting for this afternoon after services. And there's going to be lunch provided prior to that, so we'll try to get started as soon as we can. But I just wanted to welcome back Lauren McNeil and Dave Mentz, who are sitting right up front here. A lot of you got to meet them when they were doing some of the interviews and assessment here on site, and they're back this weekend to give us their report. And thank you guys so much for being here. They're going to participate a little bit in our service in a bit too, so you'll get to see them. And I also want to embarrass my special guest today, who I embarrassed earlier in our first service, and I can't believe you're just dumb enough to be here for both services. But this is my brother Chad, my beloved brother Chad. He's been visiting us for about a week, and it's just been great. We love each other. We stay in communication, but we don't get to see each other that often. So great to have you here, brother. Okay, so say hi to Chad and make some new friends today, too, for a few minutes. Let's do it. You're probably inside. That's why he's still here. And as I said, there's lots going on after our service this afternoon, including more opportunity to visit with one another, so please do stay for that. But let's move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world, and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
For our opening words this morning, I have the poem Touched by an Angel by Maya Angelou. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness, until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity. In the flush of love's light, we dare be brave. And suddenly, we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free.
And to echo that poem, we have another beautiful poem cast in song. The poet is Eleanor Farjan, and we will be singing 226, People Look East. Please rise in body or spirit.
Could we have our children come up? Or anyone else who'd like to? I'm in the sun. I'll just shine. There. Come on up, kids. There's more coming. Oh. My chicken's making noise, excuse me. So I'm going to need a helper up here to start with. Would any of you, would you be a helper? Would you come up with me? Come here. And your name is? Jude. Stand up here, Jude. Hold the chicken. Hold it up high so everybody can see it. And when you get tired, Jude, you can pass it to somebody else to hold the chicken, okay? Okay. He never gets tired. Jude will be with me the entire time. Okay. This is the story of a chicken. One day, a terrible fire broke out on the farm. The barn was suddenly engulfed by a raging wildfire, and the farmer and her husband were in town and didn't know about it. Frightened, all the animals fled their home and ran to the duck pond. Jude, let's put the duck pond over here. Okay. That's right, good. Pull that chicken up. All the animals were sad watching the destruction of their homes. Every one of them thought there was nothing they could do about the fire, except for one little chicken. Can you make him make noise now? Okay. This particular chicken decided it would do something. That's okay. You're good. Don't you It swooped into the pond and picked up a few drops of water and went to the barn and put the drops of water on the fire. Then it went back again to the pond. And then it did it again and again and again. And it kept going back and forth. And all the animals watched in disbelief. You're doing well, Jude. Some tried to discourage the chicken with comments like, "Don't bother. It's too much. You're too little. Your wings will burn. Your beak is too tiny. It's only a drop. You can't put out this fire." And as the animals stood around, disapproving of the little chicken's efforts, the bird noticed how hopeless and forlorn they looked. Then one of the animals shouted out and challenged the chicken in a mocking voice. I think it was the cow that said this. "What do you think you are doing?" And the chicken, without wasting time or losing a beat, looked back and said, "I am doing what I can." Whenever we're faced with a problem, we can remember the chicken and just do what we can. Thank you. And now we will bow. No, get up here. Now, there, perfect. I'll take the chicken. And now we will light our children's chalice, and we will sing our children out. Thank you.
We light this second chalice so that as our children and youth go to their chapels, they carry the light of our flame with them. May it illuminate, inspire, and warm you as it does us. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this church and its mission to the wider world.
Time
Thank you. We'll now kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our thoughts and minds this morning. We're going to begin with the candle for church member Pamela Comstock, who is still at rehab in Riverview. I checked in on her last night, and she's doing okay, but not able to leave yet, and has some concerns there, so please keep her in your thoughts. And also another candle for Barry and Melanie Lubick, former members of our church who now live in Mesa, but they come here whenever they're in town. Barry's undergoing cancer treatment these days, so please keep them in your thoughts as well. And one for Etta Watkins, who is the spouse of Reverend Happy Watkins. Etta fell the day before Thanksgiving and broke her leg, so we asked that we light a candle for the Watkins family, and for Etta in particular. And then we want to light a candle congratulating the Christensens, Kelsey and Billy, and Alex and Brooklyn, for the formal adoption of their new daughter, Zuri. So, yes. She's probably back with the other kids now, but you won't want to miss her. She's wearing a beautiful shirt with a big kitty cat right on the front. Congratulations to you both, and what a lucky girl to have you guys. Yep. Let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others that we might be thinking of, and if you'd like to name them aloud at this time, you'd be more than welcome to. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion.
In 1994, Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president of South Africa, succeeding F.W. de Klerk, the man who had released him from prison and with whom he shared the 1993 Nobel Peace Prize. The words to take us into our period of silent meditation this morning come from President Mandela's inaugural address. Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. Let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. Let each know that for each, the body, the mind, and the soul have been freed to fulfill themselves.
I am now going to invite our special guests, Lauren McNeil and Dave Mentz, to the pulpit to offer our readings this morning.
Good morning. I'd like to offer a reading from Gandhi. I regard untouchability as the greatest blot on Hinduism. This idea was not brought home to me by my bitter experiences during the South African struggle. It is not due to the fact that I once was an agnostic. It is equally wrong to think that I have taken my views from my study of Christian religious literature. These views date back as far as the time when I was neither enamored of nor was acquainted with the Bible or followers of the Bible. I was hardly yet 12 when this idea had dawned upon me. A scavenger named Uka, an untouchable, used to attend our house for cleaning latrines. Often I would ask my mother why it was wrong to touch him, why I was forbidden to touch him. If I accidentally touched Uka, I was asked to perform the ablutions, and though I naturally obeyed, it was not without smilingly protesting that untouchability was not sanctioned by religion, that it was impossible that it should be so. I was a very dutiful and obedient child, and so far as it was consistent with respect for parents, I often had tussles with them on this matter. I told my mother that she was entirely wrong in considering physical contact with Uka as sinful.
And our next reading is from the writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. While the Montgomery boycott was going on, India's Gandhi was the guiding light of our technique of nonviolent social change. We spoke of him often. So as soon as our victory over bus segregation was won, some of my friends said, "Why don't you go to India and see for yourself what the Mahatma, whom you so admire, has wrought?" The trip had a great impact on me personally. It was wonderful to be in Gandhi's land, to talk with his son, his grandsons, his cousin, and other relatives, to share the reminiscences of his close comrades, to visit his ashrama, to see the countless memorials for him, and finally, to lay a wreath on his entombed ashes at Rajghat. I left India more convinced than ever that nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom. It was a marvelous thing to see the amazing results of a nonviolent campaign. The aftermath of hatred and bitterness that usually follows a violent campaign was found nowhere in India. Today, a mutual friendship based on complete equality exists between the Indian and British people within the Commonwealth. The way of acquiescence leads to moral and spiritual suicide. The way of violence leads to bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. But the way of nonviolence leads to redemption and the creation of the beloved community.
And now we take a short break from those deep and wonderful ideas and words to welcome winter. We were kind of hoping for snow today, but we didn't get it. And we wanted to sing Winter Wonderland, so here we go. We had a lot of fun with that. It was nice to put it together.
Thank you all so much. As Dave reminded me during our first service, it's a natural segue to go from a Christmas song to a sermon about Gandhi, King, and Jesus, right, because of the Christmas connection. I couldn't make the segue, so he helped me out, and I thought... I'm going to begin with what I think should be the obvious and clear point of agreement between these three of history's greatest social reformers, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Jesus of Nazareth. It is their, of course, devotion to nonviolence. Gandhi said, "Nonviolence is the greatest force at the disposal of humanity. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by human ingenuity." King once said, "I think that nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and human dignity." And Jesus instructed his followers to love their enemies and to turn the other cheek, for all who take the sword will perish by it. Dr. King, as we know, used the principle of nonviolence in his struggle for civil rights in racist America. Gandhi used it to end British colonialism in India, and Jesus preached nonviolence in his struggle against Roman tyranny. Among the three, the life of the historic Jesus remains the most uncertain. obscured by 2,000 years of religious myth and dogma, which often seems to have little to do with his authentic teachings, including especially his teachings about nonviolence. It would be a different world if all of us, especially those professing to be Christians, took Jesus' teachings about nonviolence as literally as so many of the other things about him are taken. When overshadowed by the mythical Christ of faith, the revolutionary life of historic Jesus is reduced to little more than a spiritual caricature, unconcerned about earthly injustices. Yet as theologian William Herzog convincingly argues in Parables as Subversive Speech, Jesus' emphasis was always political and economic. If Jesus was a teacher of heavenly truths, Herzog says, dispensed through literary gems called parables, it is difficult to understand how he could have been executed as a political subversive and crucified between two social bandits. It's difficult to understand because, as Stephen Mitchell points out in his book, Jesus, What He Really Said and Did, the Romans crucified three kinds of offenders: rebellious slaves, habitual criminals, and conspirators against Rome. Since it seems clear Jesus was neither a slave nor a bandit, he was most likely executed for conspiring against Rome. Herzog concurs. If he had been the kind of teacher popularly portrayed in the North America church, a master of the inner life, teaching the importance of spirituality and a private relationship with God, he would have been supported by the Romans as part of their rural pacification program. That was exactly the kind of religion the Romans wanted the peasants to have. Any beliefs that encourage magic, passivity before fate, and withdrawal from the world of politics and economics into a spiritual or inner realm would have met with official approval. Like Gandhi and King, Jesus was a nonviolent activist, which is the only reasonable explanation for his execution. Each of them also experienced the injustice of prejudice and racism firsthand. Jesus for being Jewish under Roman dominion, Gandhi for being Indian under British dominion, and King for being black in a society dominated by whites. Shortly after his daughter was born, King received a phone call in the middle of the night threatening to bomb his home if he didn't leave. He was so terrified, he later admitted he was ready to give up on the civil rights movement altogether. Fortunately, he found the courage to stay with it, to keep marching on. In Stride Toward Freedom, King recounts what happened after his successful boycott of the public transit system in Montgomery. If you allow N-word to go back on the buses and sit in the front seats, we're going to burn down 50 houses in one night, including yours, warned a cryptic letter found in King's own mailbox. The boycott's success had given way to a reign of terror, he said. City buses were fired on throughout the city, especially in poorly lighted sections. A teenage girl was beaten by 4 or 5 white men as she alighted from a bus. A pregnant Negro woman was shot in the leg. Fearfully, many Negroes and whites refused to ride the buses. Describing his own experience on a bus, King said, as the white people boarded, many took seats as if nothing was going on. Others looked amazed to see Negroes sitting in front, and some appeared peeved to know that they had either to sit behind Negroes or stand. One elderly man stood up by the conductor, despite the fact that there were several vacant seats in the rear. When someone suggested he sit in the back, he responded, "I would rather die and go to hell than sit behind an N-word." Until age 12, Gandhi was allowed to study subjects like history, arithmetic, geography in his own native tongue. But in high school, he said, the schoolmaster's business was to drive English into the pupil's head. By his senior year, everything had to be learnt in English. Geometry, algebra, chemistry, astronomy, history, geography, he said. The tyranny of English was so great that even Sanskrit or Persian had to be learned through English, not through the mother tongue. Had he been able to study in his own language, he said, my grasp of the subjects would have been easier and clearer. Additionally, I could not, even if I wished, interest my father in what I was learning. For though he had ample intelligence, he knew not a word of English. I was fast becoming a stranger in my own home. Like millions of other Indian students distanced from family and tradition, Gandhi concluded high schools were schools for cultural conquest by the English. Jesus grew up similarly during a period of Roman occupation, which was particularly harsh toward Jews. His was a society in which the first had everything and the last had nothing. The rulers, Herzog says, viewed themselves as the rightful owners of all the lands and assets of the state, which they could confiscate and redistribute as they pleased. Beneath the ruler was the ruling class, an elite group representing 1 or 2% of the population that used its political position to accumulate greater wealth, because everything was for sale, including justice, favors, offices, and influence. Herzog estimates the top 2% of the population in Jesus' day controlled as much as 67% of the wealth. Could you imagine living in such a society? Five to 7% of the population were retainers, a group that served the top 1 to 2% by collecting payments from the peasants. These were made up of priests who upheld the system through religious rhetoric, the military, which upheld it by force, and scribes who kept an account of what the peasantry owed. Retainers were paid but not well, and used their positions to charge additional fees that they then kept for themselves. Because peasants had almost no contact with the ruling elite responsible for exploiting them, most of their hostility was projected onto the retainer class that they did have contact with, which is why they hated tax collectors, whom Jesus embraced, realizing that they were also victims of desperation. With the exception of a small number of peddlers and merchants who provided a few luxury items to the elite and the artisans who crafted them, most of the population, about 70%, was made up of peasants. Even if they owned their land, probably because they inherited it, the ruling class took almost everything that they produced. The elite considered the peasants, in Herzog's words, as little more than animals, whose energy was needed to produce the wealth and the land that the land generated. They were allowed to keep only the barest minimum needed for their own subsistence. Beneath the peasants were those considered unclean, probably because of some degrading job that they had to take on. Herzog says they were either herded into urban ghettos or segregated from the rest of the population. And Stephen Mitchell makes a very strong argument that Jesus belonged to this class, having been born illegitimate. In the ancient world, he explains, both Jewish and Roman, illegitimacy was considered one of the most shameful of human conditions. The mamzerim, as they were called, were considered the excrement of the community. Perhaps this is why Jesus associated with outcasts and sinners, and why he defiantly called himself both a son of man and of God, both a human being and a child of God. As a mamzer, Jesus would only have been allowed to work a degrading job, which is one of the reports about him. Aristocrats, Herzog says, viewed all manual labor as degrading, and they considered those who engaged in it as inferior creatures, little better than slaves. As a result, artisans lived on the edge of destitution. At the very bottom of society, accounting for 5 to 10% of the population, though sometimes as high as 15%, were the expendables, a homeless, jobless class who spent most of their time either begging in the streets or hiring out as day laborers. The expendables, Herzog says, were largely composed of the excess children of peasant households who could afford to pass their inheritance on to only one child, usually the eldest son. The holdings of these peasants were too small to support more children. Upon falling into this class, one's life expectancy became no more than another 7 years. In the peasantry, artisans, merchants, and outcasts always teetered on the verge of becoming expendable. That was their struggle, their daily struggle. The expendables in ancient Rome were called untouchables in India because they were literally considered too unclean to come into physical contact with. Gandhi once said, as you heard earlier, "I regard untouchability as the greatest blot on Hinduism." Martin Luther King, who greatly admired Gandhi, kept a portrait of him above his dining room table and, as you heard, visited India after Gandhi's death. He said Gandhi not only spoke against the caste system, but he acted against it. He took untouchables by the hand and led them into the temples from which they had been excluded. This is not unlike Jesus, who was often criticized for associating with social outcasts. To equal that, King said, President Eisenhower would have to take a Negro child by the hand and lead her into Central High School in Little Rock. Later in life, Gandhi renamed the untouchables Harijans, which means children of God. Just as Jesus, a mamzer, called himself both a son of God and a son of man, a human being, in defiance of the prejudices against him and those like him. Gandhi and King certainly sacrificed a lot, including their own lives, to accomplish reform. But one difference between the three may be the extent to which Jesus went to avoid participating in the economic inequality of his day. Gandhi may have come close, having given up all but the 6 spinning wheels, a few prison dishes, a can of goat's milk, and a dozen homespun loincloths he owned upon his death. Love and exclusive possession can never go together, Gandhi said. Ideally, he believed one can only exercise perfect love by becoming completely dispossessed. Since nobody is perfect, however, Gandhi was willing to settle for having no more than one needs. God never stores for the morrow, he said. He never creates more than what is strictly needed for the moment. This is why, in addition to considering poverty the worst form of violence, he also said, if I take anything that I do not need for my own immediate use and keep it, I thieve it from somebody else. That's pretty strict, which was one of the problems and strengths of the great soul. Practically speaking, today, it would mean none of us would even own refrigerators or pantries, let alone have bank accounts or retirement funds. At least Gandhi lived in a commune where they grew food and he had a roof over his head. But Jesus tried to live with absolutely nothing, not because he thought it was a crime to have possessions, but because he believed in the abundance all around him. He didn't think, as Gandhi did, God only made enough for the moment, but that there's always so much of everything we need that nobody should ever have to worry. I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear, for life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap, yet they have no storehouses nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Consider the lilies, how they grow. They never toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. Putting his money, or lack thereof, where his mouth was, Jesus said, foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man, the human being, has nowhere to lay his head. He told his itinerant followers, take nothing for your journey. No staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, not even an extra tunic. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth. You cannot serve God and wealth. Don't worry about your life, what you will eat and what you will drink. About your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Gandhi's philosophy of dispossession was based on a mindset of scarcity, that we must use our resources sparingly, not hoarding more than we need right now, or there won't be enough for everyone. But Jesus had an abundance mindset, that there's no need to take more than we need right now, more than our daily bread, because there's always plenty for everyone. That's the miracle of the fish and loaves, that there's always more than enough to go around. But I really appreciate Jesus' response when asked if it is ethical to pay taxes to the oppressive Roman government. Everyone remembers him saying, give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, right? But he said something before that. How many of you remember what he said before that? Yeah, because we twist the story, right? We think it's about doing what the government tells us to do. No. What did he say? He wanted to see a coin. Yeah, the first, is it right to pay taxes to the Roman government? Bring me a coin. Which implies what? He didn't have a denarius on him. And when he finally saw it, he had to at least feign unfamiliarity with it. Whose image is that? That's this little spider has been. Whose image is that? And when they tell him, he says, okay, well then give it to him. Right? Jesus wanted no part of that unjust economy, not even to have one penny to his name. So, unlike Gandhi and King, who worked to change the unjust systems they were in, Jesus, who had nothing, including no legal rights as a mamzer, refused to recognize or legitimize the system by participating in it at all, and encouraged others to do the same. While I admire historic Jesus' refusal to participate in unjust systems, his efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Although an enduring global religion emerged in his name, his commitment to nonviolent non-participation has not endured. Throughout much of history, Christianity, in fact, has been the system, and a violent and oppressive one at that. Only 30 years after his execution, the Jews revolted against their Roman oppressors violently, resulting in their own defeat and the destruction of their temple. His nonviolence didn't take hold among his people, and certainly not among the Romans, who eventually adopted Christianity as their official religion. Jesus failed in his immediate effort to establish a better society. Yet he did influence the thinking of the Universalist minister, Aidan Ballou, who wrote about his nonviolence in his 1846 book, Christian Non-Resistance, which influenced Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, which influenced Gandhi, who influenced Dr. King. Gandhi and millions of his followers then used nonviolence to successfully force the British out of India, and Dr. King influenced millions more to nonviolently bring about the passage of civil rights laws. Maybe his refusal to participate in unjust systems is what Jesus meant by the only violent metaphor attributed to him. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Maybe sometimes the only way to get us to see the futility and injustice of our own social paradigms is to go cold turkey, even if it means creating division among friends and family, even if we're crucified in the process. And maybe sometimes it's better, more effective strategy to make incremental changes within the system. Reform our current system by ever widening its circle of inclusion bit by bit. I can't tell you which, when, or if one approach is better than the other. I'm no expert in that. That's something each of us must determine for ourselves, and hopefully without too much judgment toward those who decide differently. What I can tell you with some confidence is that Gandhi, King, and Jesus shared common experiences, common values, and common dreams. They were similar in many ways and each uniquely different in others. Today, as far as I'm concerned, all of them are among those few individuals who stand out as exemplars of human goodness and the potential in each one of us. They rose above the pain and prejudice they experienced to become giants in our hearts and in our histories, not because they conquered and ruled nations, but because they conquered their own hate by transforming their rage into courage and their suffering into compassion for everyone. For everyone. Friend or foe. In a way, the martyred spirit of each one still stands before us, beckoning us forward, summoning us to be our best. Come, follow me. Come, walk with me. Come, march with me. And maybe we'll change the world. Thank you.
Our final hymn of the morning is number 187. It sounds along the ages. Please rise in body or spirit. It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul. It kindles on the pages of every Bible scroll. The psalmist heard and sang it, from martyr lips it broke, and prophet tongues outrang it, till sleeping nations woke. From Sinai's cliffs it echoed, it breathed from Buddha's tree. It charmed in Athens' market, it hallowed Galilee. The hammer stroke of Luther, the pilgrim's seaside prayer,
We closed this morning with a poem from Kaylin Haught called God Says Yes to Me. I asked God if it was okay to be melodramatic, and she said yes. I asked her if it was okay to be short, and she said, it sure is. I asked her if I could wear nail polish or not wear nail polish, and she said, honey, she calls me that sometimes, she said, you can do just exactly what you want to. Thanks, God, I said. And is it even okay if I don't paragraph my letters? Sweet cakes, God said. Who knows where she picked that up? What I'm telling you is yes, yes, yes. Amen. Blessed be. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Shalom, Haverim, Shalom, Haverim, Shalom, 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 Haverim, Shalom, Haverim, Shalom, Shalom. I know. Love it.